coast. Welcome back, America. We're at the bottom of the first hour. Mike Shoesmith is my next guest coming up. Let me just remind you, tomorrow, this show and everything that we talk about, and we've got a lot of good stuff coming. And if you missed that last segment, you missed a riveting segment. Dr. Michael S. Heiser. You're going to want to hear the show and get the podcast just for that alone. But Mike Shoesmith's coming up next, and in the top of the second hour, Brandon Big B and I will be unraveling this Seth Rich murder mystery. So anyway, you're going to want it. Just go to carlgallups.com. carlgallups.com tomorrow and click on anything that says Freedom Friday. It'll take you right to the Freedom Friday webpage, and it's all brand new. It's all been reworked, and the deal is now you can just listen right there. In fact, you can listen to any of the past shows anytime you want. Smartphone, Apple, Android. I'm trying to remember what all the platforms are. Every web browser, and you can download it, or you can just click the play button and listen to it. Pick the program you want, and it's all neatly categorized. You can go back for months and pick a program if you want. And there are a few articles scattered in between, but the programs are very easy to find. This program will be there tomorrow. So go to carlgallups.com, click on anything that says Freedom Friday, and boom, there you are. Mike Shoesmith is my next guest. And Mike's good to have you in the house. Mike's the executive editor of PNN News and Ministry Network. And so you're going to tell us about some rewriting of the evolutionary history books again, right?
They're rewriting the fairy tale story here, Carl, of evolution.
Once more.
This is going to be the biggest rewrite of educational textbooks since they discovered that Piltdown Man was a fraud. You remember that whole thing? They had that Piltdown Man in textbooks for, 40 years?
Yep.
That Piltdown Man was the missing link, and it's all been discovered, and they put it in all the class textbooks and everything. It was 20 years after they discovered it was a fraud, they kept it in the textbooks for some ridiculous number?
Yeah.
Well, this is going to top even that.
Okay.
This is going to top even that. The history, now this is Sarah Napton. She's the science editor at telegraph.co.uk.
Mm-hmm.
She is writing this article. The history of human evolution has been rewritten. Now, whenever I read that, in my mind, I always put quotes in front of and behind the word evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Because you and I aren't evolution deniers. We believe that evolution is happening, thank God, because otherwise, we'd all be driving, Model A Fords, right?
Right.
Cars have evolved, people evolve on a micro level. There are people who can climb Everest, for example, without auxiliary oxygen tanks. Why? Because they've evolved. The first time they went up, they needed oxygen tanks. The 100th time they go up, they don't need oxygen tanks anymore. Their bodies have adapted to tolerate the low levels of oxygen up there, right?
But they're still human. That's the point.
That they're still human, right?
Right.
We're not evolution deniers. We just don't believe the fraud, the science fraud that fish turned into human beings over billions of years.
Right.
For that, there is no evidence.
Right.
No evidence for that at all, right?
Right.
But, humanity has been duped into this theory, and it's an interesting theory. I mean, if you take God out of it, I suppose this might be the best they can do, right?
It is the best they can do without God. That's the best. That's the best that humans have, and there's zero evidence, and it sounds like some acid trip fairy tale.
Right. Well, it gets even more curiouser and curiouser, speaking of fairy tales here, Carl.
Yes, just... It takes a Canadian to butcher the English language. There's no such thing as curious or right. Oh, let's not have that conversation again.
All right. Was Shakespeare a Canadian? I didn't know that.
Anyway, move on.
Currently, the story begins in Africa, right, where humankind split from the common ancestor that we have allegedly with chimpanzees, right?
Yeah,
that chimpanzees and people have a common ancestor, and we split from that common ancestor 7 million years ago, according to these fairy tale authors. And that all happened in Africa. Well, 2 fossils of an ape-like creature, which had human-like teeth, have been found in Bulgaria and Greece, dating to 7.2 million years ago, Carl.
Mm-hmm.
That means
0.2. I mean, they've got it down, man. 7.2 million years. Although there is no agreeing scientific method to date that. But anyway, that's part of the fairy tale.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. They date the bones by dating the rocks they find next to them, right? And there's a whole fraud behind that. It's called the bone peddler fraud. But we don't have time to get into that today. The discovery of the creature named Grecopithecus freybergi and nicknamed El Greco by scientists proves, Carl.
Yes.
Now, wait a minute.
That's what it says.
Haven't we been hearing for the last 50 years that they have proven that this all began in Africa? They've proven that, Carl.
Yeah, they've proven it.
Now they're saying they have proven that our ancestors were already evolving in Europe 200,000 years before the earliest African hominid, right? Here's the thing with all of this, you know. But actually, it's interesting though. Don't you find it interesting that they've now traced the beginnings of humankind back to Bulgaria and Greece?
I know. I think that's I think that's a racist statement. I think that they're being very intolerant and very racist. I mean, we had it starting in Africa, you know, which gave a whole narrative, to the world. And now we're going to change the narrative and put it over there where all those white people were from.
That's terrible, Carl. Terrible. I know, right? But I also find it interesting that now they've gone back to the Mediterranean, right? They may be getting closer to Eden here, is what I'm saying. They may be getting closer to Eden, where things actually did begin. You know, because there's an old saying, you know, that these scientists, as they chip away at their theories and they find actual knowledge, actual science, which comes from the Latin word scientia, which literally means knowledge, when they find, you know, the knowledge, and they keep throwing this real knowledge up on the mountain of knowledge, right? And they keep climbing this mountain of knowledge. When they get to the top of this mountain of real knowledge, they'll just be greeted by a guy with a preacher saying, "What took you so long?"
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, right.
Right, so, I mean, that's basically the bottom line here. This is why we don't trust any of this, any of these welfare scientists, I call them, you know, because when they learn this stuff in school, there's no way they can make any. There's nothing beneficial scientifically that comes out of these evolution crackpots. Nothing at all. They don't contribute anything. Nothing that we benefit from scientifically requires the belief in evolution to discover it.
Right.
None of it. I mean, and you take things like antibiotics and vaccines and so on. You know, like these people that discover all this stuff. Antibiotics was discovered when a guy went for a lunch break, left his petri dish out on his desk. When he came back, some mold had flown, penicillin mold had flown into in through his window because he left his window open. And you know, it was discovered that the penicillin killed off all this bacteria. That's how penicillin, that's how antibiotics was discovered, folks. This guy, there's no requirement. I don't know if the guy believed in evolution or not, but you know what? It doesn't matter. Because none of this, no scientific breakthroughs or discoveries require the belief that fish turned into human beings over billions and billions of years. There's no scientific benefit to that whatsoever. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
No, I agree. I mean, I was letting you rant. I mean, no, I absolutely agree with everything. You and I've had deep discussions about this, lengthy discussions about this, and so I'm looking at this article. And you know, and I'm looking at the words, this proves, and then they go on in their glee to talk about this, you know, this changes the ideas, this changes the story, this changes the narrative. Well, wow. I mean, that's a huge admission.
Yes, I did. I want to end this segment with an anecdote. I was listening to a comedian, and he said that before he got into comedy, he was studying to be he's starting to learn about dinosaurs. He wanted to be a dinosaur expert, so he was actually taking college classes on to be a dinosaur expert, and he became sort of disillusioned with the whole thing when he made some shocking discoveries. Once he became embedded in the community, sort of right. He discovered that what basically they do is they find little tiny bone fragments, right? And they build this entire imaginary thing out of this tiny bone fragment. And he was shocked by that how little evidence there is. You know, on NPR, they exposed the fact that if you add up all of the bone fossils, the human bone fossils that they discovered on planet Earth, ever, all of them I mean, all the actual ones, not the ones where they take paper mache and a grinder and they build this thing they think it represents. The actual bone fragments, human fossils that they've discovered, you can put all of it in the back of a pickup truck.
Right.
I mean, that's how little they actually have. And we're supposed to believe that they know that we came from fish over billions of years. Anyway, this comedian, he says, I learned that, and that really bothered me. But see, then he said, I learned about the collusion, the global collusion. And he described it as this worldwide conspiracy to create these models and these images and these cartoons and these these puppets and all this stuff. They make phone calls. Somebody will find a bone fragment somewhere. They'll say, okay, I think this looks like, we're going to call it this, and I'm going to call all my buddies around the world, the scientific community, and we're all going to have a little confab conference on the phone. And we're going to say, okay, I just discovered this. Let's call it this. Let's say it had a tail. Let's say it had webbed feet or whatever, and let's just say this and build a model, and let's all agree. And this guy discovered that this was happening, and he said, you know what? I don't want any part of this. I don't want no part of what you guys are doing at all. It was his lifelong dream to be able to study dinosaurs. And he says, there's nothing to study. They have so little evidence, Carl. There's nothing to study.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to end this with.
Yeah. No, it's.
Oh, and by the way, before we get to the break, I want to say a teaser about what's happening after the break. By the way, what they also discovered about these so-called hominids that they discovered in Greece is that they drove SUVs and they heated their homes using dirty coal. That's what they also discovered. 7.2 billion years ago, that was happening back then.
Okay, great. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But you're right. The whole thing is driven by an agenda, and I love what you call it, welfare science, because here's what I envision. These guys go to school, and they're all pumped up because all of their life since they've been in pre-K, they've been told this gobbledygook, this pseudo-scientific fairy tale, and it sounds so fascinating, and as they go through school and then even into college, and oh man, that's what I want to be. And the program Friends, you remember that? And I think his name was Rob, one of the main characters. I think that was his name. I didn't watch it. I saw 2 or 3 episodes and realized what filth it was. But anyway, but he supposedly was a paleontologist, or and so, people say, oh, that's so cool, that's so cool. And here's what I envision, Mike. So they get their degree, and they come out, and they realize they've got a degree in nothing.
They spend 90% of their time writing papers to apply for grant money.
Yeah.
That's what they spend 90% of their time doing.
Right. That's my point. And so as you said, it becomes welfare. Welfare science. The only way we can stay employed is to get government grants, but to get government grants, we have to hold to the globalist agenda. What's the globalist agenda? That fish turned into men. Okay, so I have to stay with that, and whatever I find in the field, I have to make it fit that mold, regardless of how many times I have to say, oops, this discovery changes everything, right?
Exactly.
Okay, well, I've got more to say, and so do you, but let's take a break. We're going to go take a time out real quick. Mike Shoesmith, I told you it was going to be exciting, didn't I? Mike Shoesmith on the line. We'll come back with more of that and more of report on this story and some other things as well. And then at the top of the hour, Brandon Big B, we'll be talking about the Seth Rich case. We've got some bombshells to drop on you with that. In the meantime, aren't you glad you're in the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio? Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups. Don't go anywhere.
Are you ready for this?
For mature audiences only.
And now, the Commander-in-Chief is back. Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups, the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio.
All right, welcome back, Gulf Coast. Welcome back, America. So Mike Shoesmith is in the house, and we're talking about this latest announcement from the so-called science world. Mike, it appears that evolutionary science is just about as reliable as, say, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, as the fake news, right? I mean,
well, exactly, and man, it's just as reliable as this climate change hoax. By the way, we spoke earlier before the break about how these 7.2 million years ago, these ancient hominids were using driving SUVs and running around, heating their homes with coal, dirty coal. Well, that's because in the article, it says an international team of researchers say the findings entirely change the beginning of human history. No,
Yes.
it doesn't. It doesn't change anything.
No.
It changes what you believe about it.
That's right.
It changes your fairy tale. That's what it changes.
That's right.
Of both chimpanzees and humans.
And by the way, it
so-called
changes
missing link.
their fairy tale that they invented.
Right.
It changes everything about what they've been telling us before that they had proven.
And there's a lot of faith language in this article,
Oh,
by the way,
yeah.
if you go to the
Mushy
Freedom
language.
Friday Facebook page. It says the so-called missing link in the Mediterranean region. And then in the very next sentence, at that time, climate change had turned Eastern Europe into an open savanna, which forced apes to find new food, blah, blah, blah. Climate change 7.2 million years ago. Donald Trump is at the G7 right now in Italy. And what are they talking about? The Paris Summit Agreement and all this stuff, and Donald Trump. I really hope that Donald Trump puts his foot down on the oxygen tube that is feeding this climate change hoax
Right.
and just lets it die.
Right.
Because we're not saying that climate change is a hoax. The climate's changing all the time. I see massive climate change over the course of a week.
Right.
I can drive through the desert one day and a snowstorm the next, as you know.
Yes.
That's climate change. And also, we know that at the flood there was climate change big time, right? The biggest climate change event in Earth's history was at the flood. And, climate changes every day in Florida. In the spring, you can have your heat on at night and the air conditioner on in the daytime. I mean, that's climate change. Climate change is just two words put together. That's all it is, right? Just like evolution, it's just a word. What we don't believe in is that people, that we have to pay taxes, billions of dollars a year in taxes, to these climate depots, these carbon credit depots, so that they can enrich themselves on this fraud, this known fraud. There's more evidence that this is a fraud than we had at Piltdown, man. We had those fraudulent emails come out several years ago. I'm not sure if you remember that, out of England there, where they're coaxing the language on this. This is what you say to get people to believe in this fairy tale coming out that people are responsible. You know what? People respond well to guilt, right?
And climate
open up their wallets.
Yeah, and climate change is welfare science, just like evolution.
Welfare
They depend upon our tax dollars to promulgate their fairy tale.
And I live up here in Ontario, Canada. Oh my God. People in Ontario, Canada are absolutely livid right now because the government of Ontario, they went out and they spent billions of dollars on enormous windmills and these solar panel farms, which take up acres and acres and acres, and they don't produce much electricity.
Yeah.
I know this, and I'll get to that in a second. But now the bill has just come in, Carl. This past winter, everybody's heating and electric bills tripled. Some people are paying $1,000 a month to heat the house. And the bill has come in on all these things.
Yeah.
And in one of my bills, I got a breakdown of where all the power comes from. 80% of it comes from nuclear. We don't have any coal-fired plants in Canada anymore. They're all gone. 80% of it comes from nuclear. 8% comes from wind. 2% comes from solar. That's it. I mean, these things are not producing the power that they promised, and yet everybody's paying 3 times the amount of money to heat their $1,000 a month. Can you imagine paying $1,000 a month to heat your home? These are the bills that people in Ontario are getting right now.
Yeah, and back to this article as it relates. So we've got this complete change of the story, and in the article it mentions climate change millions of years ago. And then I just read another sentence in the same article. It says the team believed that evolution of hominids may have been driven by dramatic environmental changes, same thing, climate change, which sparked the formation of the North African Sahara more than 7 million years ago. Listen to all this mushy language, Mike. They believe, we think, we speculate. Our theory is, it's unbelievable. Climate change. So I guess they were all driving SUVs back then, right?
Well, the climate, I suspect, and I believe there's evidence for, these people saw this coming. and they thought, we can make money off of this. Let's blame the people. Let's rape them of all their hard-earned money.
Oh, yeah.
And I think they saw us coming, whether we were here or not. It was coming.
All of this is being driven by the globalist agenda, which is being driven by a demonic agenda. Mike, you and I know that.
Right.
We come from a biblical worldview. We know where it starts. Well, say bye to the folks,
Right.
Mike. We got 10 seconds.
ppsimmons@live.com. I love you guys, and I hope to see you guys in Boise, Idaho in August. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks, Mike Shoesmith. And thank you, folks, for listening. Don't forget, go to carlgallups.com tomorrow. Get the podcast of this show. In fact, you can just listen to it right there. Click on anything that says Freedom Friday. We'll be back at the top of the second hour in just a second. Don't go anywhere, because Brandon Big B will be in the house.